So in this video, we're going to talk about arachidonic acid metabolites, which some of them are prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and lipoxins. So arachidonic acid is, let me just draw a little picture here to help illustrate this. So here's a cell, here's the nucleus. This is going to be a blown up picture of this cell membrane. So we have these phospholipids is what they're called. And the cell membrane, oh, that's a little big. I should have drawn this picture before so you wouldn't have to watch me draw this picture. But anywho, this is a bilayer, a phospholipid bilayer, the cell membrane. And arachidonic acid is a 20 carbon chain. So there's a carbon, 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 down to 20. There's 20 carbons in this fatty acid chain here, and it has 4 double bonds. It's a double, so if it was like down to 20 or whatever, there would be 4 of these double bonds. And phospholipase, so we have phospholipase. This enzyme here starts breaking down, starts cleaving these arachidonic acids inside these phospholipids, and they create, there's a whole slew of metabolites, fragments, if you will, of arachidonic acid that are involved in the inflammatory response. So if we had, let's just move over here. If we had arachidonic acid and we had, let's see here, phospholipase. Phospholipase starts breaking this down, arachidonic acid down into its component parts. So which cells are responsible for kind of producing these arachidonic acid metabolites? Well, let me scroll over here. There are leukocytes, mast cells, endothelial cells, and platelets. These cells are responsible for producing these arachidonic acid metabolites. And the phospholipases, they take the cell membrane, these phospholipids, and then they convert them into arachidonic acid. Now, let me just erase this if this is confusing to you. So you take these phospholipids in the cell membrane of primarily these cells, the leukocytes, the mast cells, endothelial cells, and platelets. And remember, platelets are circulating in the blood. The endothelial cells are the cells that are surrounding the blood vessel wall. The mast cells are outside of the, just draw a picture here. If this, scroll over here. So we have, here's a blood vessel. So you can see this. We have these platelets, and they're just kind of circulating in the bloodstream. These endothelial cells are these cells that are one layer thick along the blood vessel wall. And then we have these mast cells. Let me choose this color here. These mast cells, and these cells are outside of the blood vessel into the extracellular matrix, just kind of waiting around for something to happen. And these leukocytes are also circulating inside the bloodstream, but they're a lot bigger. They're not as wide as the blood vessel, but they're a lot bigger than the platelets. So those are the cells that are responsible for producing these arachidonic acid metabolites. And the phospholipase is the enzyme that starts chewing up these phospholipid tails and breaking them down into arachidonic acid. Now, once you have arachidonic acid, there's kind of two main pathways that it can, follow. So, what are those two pathways? So, arachidonic acid can be broken down into prostaglandins and Thromboxanes, or leukotrienes and lipoxins. These are the kind of the four main, metabolites, if you will, of arachidonic acid. Now, these cyclooxygenase, sorry, that kind of covered up that, but cyclooxygenase and lipoxygenase, these are two enzymes. So, if the body needs prostaglandins or thromboxanes, then cyclooxygenase, this enzyme, will start chewing up arachidonic acid. This, let me just draw this here, and etc., etc., etc. It will start chewing up these tails into certain parts, or certain, how many carbons it needs to make prostaglandins, and how many, maybe this is a 3 carbon, and maybe this is a 4 carbon. It will chew up these arachidonic acid fatty tails into prostaglandins and thromboxanes. If it needs leukotrienes or lipoxins, then the lipoxygenase enzyme will do the same thing. It will chew up these arachidonic acid fatty tails into these component parts. This is a kind of a hard concept to understand. It's very confusing, and there's a lot of names and enzymes and everything. So I'm going to use a picture here to help kind of explain the issue. Now, I don't know if this picture confuses the issue or makes it easier to understand, but we'll go through this whole diagram. And this diagram is taken from the Robbins Basic Pathology textbook, 8th edition. Kumar is the author. And remember from what we talked about before, the leukocytes, mast cells, endothelial cells, and platelets are the ones that kind of produce this arachidonic acid, this 12 or 20 carbon chain here. So if we have in the cell membranes, we have phospholipases, and they chew up those parts of the cell membrane, not enough to kill the cell or to damage the membrane, but just to use this arachidonic acid to produce, all of these different metabolites that are brought about. Now, cyclooxygenase, like we said up here, can produce prostaglandins and thromboxanes, and lipoxygenase produces leukotrienes and lipoxins. So if we use this cyclooxygenase pathway, it will convert, this is an enzyme, so what it does is it converts arachidonic acid to prostaglandin G2 and prostaglandin H2. Now once you have, prostaglandin H2, then it can either be converted to thromboxane or prostacyclin. And this is what it causes. Prostacyclin causes vasodilation, and it inhibits platelet aggregation. And one thing I forgot to mention is arachidonic acid metabolites can be used for inflammation and also hemostasis, which is blood clotting, if part of the blood clotting or slowing down of blood. So some of these effects on the human body also, our topics is mostly inflammation, but they're also explaining some of this hemostasis concept. And then the thromboxanes, they cause vasoconstriction, which promotes platelet aggregation. Now, once you have these prostaglandin H2s, they can be further converted into PG2 or PGE2, which causes vasodilation and increases vascular permeability. Remember that for the inflammation process, these, if this is a normal diameter of a blood vessel, then it's going to get a lot bigger. The size of it's going to get a lot bigger, which causes more blood flow, and then there's going to be little holes within the endothelial cells for stuff to leak out into the extracellular matrix primarily, for leukocytes to get out and start destroying the antigen or whatever's the problem. You can review previous videos to understand more about that. Now the 5-lipoxygenase, it creates these two. It creates this molecule, which then can be converted to this molecule, and the primary reason why is to create chemotaxis. Remember that we talked about how, if this is a battle going on between cells here, and this is a blood vessel out here, and this white blood cell, this leukocyte, gets out, diapedesis out of the blood vessel. How does he know how to get over to this battle? There's not like a road that will tell them to go this way. There's little chemical signals here, and he needs to follow these chemical signals, which helps with chemotaxis, and that's what chemotaxis is. And so 5-HETE and leukotriene B4 help with chemotaxis. Now the HPETE can also be converted into these molecules, and these molecules cause vasoconstriction, bronchospasm, and also increase vascular permeability, like this PGD2 and PGE2. Now, the lipoxane A4 and lipoxin B4, now they are kind of the brake of the inflammation response, if you will. They inhibit neutrophil adhesion and chemotaxis. So once these leukocytes, because remember, the leukocytes, mast cells, endothelial cells, and platelets are responsible mainly for these pathways here. The leukocytes, once they start cleaning up the mess, and say this is let's say this is 75%, taken care of, if you will, these leukocytes will start using this pathway and start producing these chemicals, and these chemicals will inhibit these neutrophils. Remember, we made a whole video on this, but how these neutrophils will start rolling, and it's called marginization and rolling, and will kind of stop and attach firmly, and then diapedese out of this endothelial cells, out of this blood vessel. This is a blood vessel. These chemicals here inhibit this process, and it also inhibits this chemotaxis, so they won't know where to go, so it will inhibit the chemotaxis. So as this fight is coming down to an end, then the leukocytes will switch pathways and start going down this pathway. Now here, the reason why it's so great to know all these pathways, even though it's confusing as heck, and I don't have all these little names memorized, but I want us to understand conceptually, what's going on with this arachidonic acid metabolites, and I think we got a pretty good idea of that. But the reason why we want to understand all this is because in the pharmaceutical industry, they try to design drugs that will inhibit these pathways, so that inflammation won't be such a big problem. And so, especially in autoimmune cases. But these steroids, there's certain steroid drugs that inhibit these phospholipases. So these drugs take out this phospholipase, so then this phospholipase, it can't convert the cell membrane phospholipids to arachidonic acid, so these pathways won't happen. Another thing is the COX-1 and the COX-2 inhibitors, aspirin and indomethacin. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's a drug that inhibits these cyclooxygenases, these enzymes, to go down this pathway to promote inflammation. And I'm sure we've heard of NSAIDs, nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So these are ibuprofen, Tylenol, aspirin, these types of drugs that we take when we have a fever or when we're hurting because we have pain because we worked out too hard or whatever. These non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, they knock out this cyclooxygenase. Now there's two types, or there's two enzymes. I'm going to go this way a little bit because I need to draw here. But there's two types. There's COX-1, so you have COX-1 and you have COX-2 of this cyclooxygenase. There's two versions, two flavors, if you will. This is the two versions of this enzyme. Now, the NSAIDs, they take out both versions of the cyclooxygenase enzyme, which is a good thing, that the drug will take out both types of these enzymes, so you don't have vascular this inflammation response augmented over time through these prostaglandins and these thromboxanes. However, this COX-1 enzyme, this cyclooxygenase 1 enzyme, let me just go down here, is in the gastric mucosa, which is the stomach, in the stomach lining. Okay, so inside your stomach, you have these COX-1 cyclooxygenase enzymes, and they produce prostaglandins inside the stomach. So these prostaglandins are inside the stomach too, and these prostaglandins inside the stomach protect against acid, your stomach acid, because your stomach acid is very, very acidic, and it needs to be to kill to kill any bacteria that's in your food, to break down the food that we eat and everything. But these gastromucosa cells and this lining, the stomach lining, produce prostaglandins inside your stomach, and these prostaglandins protect against the acid. So when you take non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, you're knocking out this COX-1 and this COX-2. And this COX-1 means that you're not going to have any prostaglandins, which are protective against your stomach lining. And in the case when people take these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or these ibuprofen or Tylenol for long periods of time, then you're going to get ulcers. You're going to get stomach ulcers because this acid is going to eat away your stomach lining, because you're not producing these prostaglandins, because you're taking these drugs that are knocking out both versions of this cyclooxygenase enzyme. Now, well, then why doesn't the question is, so why don't the drug companies just create this COX-2 inhibitor that just knocks out the COX-2, which is more in line with this anti-inflammatory? Well, they have, and the problem is just the COX-2 have cardio effects. I'll just put it up here. Bad cardio effects. So it affects your cardiovascular system. The drugs that they've designed has a negative influence on your cardiovascular system. So, you know, I'm not saying that taking nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are bad for short periods of time, but what I am saying is that it is over long periods of time, and there's plenty of research out there to support that claim. So now that we understand a little bit about arachidonic acid and cell membrane phospholipids, we can move on to the next video.